I'm truly honored by this award, and I'm deeply grateful to the Terezín Music Foundation and its director, Mark Ludwig, for upholding and amplifying the legacy of the musicians of Terezín. The foundation's work to recover, preserve, and perform the music created by the Terezín artists and to commission new works by emerging artists has helped give voice to those who perished in the Holocaust and to all who are silenced by war or genocide. That mission of giving voice to the voiceless is one I have done my best to fulfill. As you know, I was born in Czechoslovakia 22 months before the Nazi invasion. My parents and I escaped to London, where my father served as head of broadcasting for our nation's government in exile. After the Nazis were defeated, we returned home, hoping to live a normal existence in a free land. But in February 1948, the communists staged a coup. My family sought refuge again, this time receiving a permanent and welcome home in the United States. Although I knew the basic outlines of the story from a young age, I didn't discover until I was almost 60 years old that my family's heritage was Jewish, or that more than 24 of my relatives, including 3 grandparents, had died in the Holocaust. I now have 6 grandchildren, and I cannot look at them without realizing that at one time, before I was old enough to remember, I had been looked at upon with the same way and same degree of love that I now feel for those young people. And yet my grandparents as individuals were virtually unknown to me. I could not recall even saying the words grandmother or grandfather. In writing my 2012 book, Prague Winter, I hope to learn more about them and the times in which they lived, and I also wanted to honor their memory. When I began my research, I was aware of the general facts surrounding my family's history and that of related events, but as I talked to experts and sifted through documents, I was able to dig a bit deeper. For example, I learned more about the period leading up to World War II, when many opinion leaders underestimated the Nazi menace. Even Winston Churchill wrote that Adolf Hitler might one day be remembered in favorable terms. I found that during the war, my father's broadcast team in London explicitly warned the Nazis against killing Czech Jews. In one case, the publicity succeeded in delaying a mass execution, but only for a month. I discovered that my paternal grandfather, Adnos Korbel, succumbed to bronchial pneumonia just a few months after arriving in Terezín. I learned that the cardboard urn containing his ashes was probably among those removed from the camp and dumped in a river as part of the Nazi plan to conceal evidence of what they had done. I found out that several of my relatives, including my paternal grandmother Olga, my great uncle Rudolf, and my cousin Milena, were transported on the last trains to Auschwitz from Terezín. A few weeks more, and they might have survived. I learned that the Gestapo had a file on my father, including the correct address in England of where our family was staying. Overall, the saga I told in Prague Winter is a tragic one, but I did not come away from that project in despair. On the contrary, for me, it provided added testimony to the incredible human capacity to renew itself despite the presence of great evil. I was able to describe how the leaders of Czechoslovakia were able to restore their nation's independence after the country had been torn apart and conquered by the Third Reich. And I was able to tell about how the British, when backed into a corner, were able to survive 56 consecutive days of enemy bombing and thereby inspire the forces of democracy on both sides of the Atlantic. I reported on the daring plan of the Czech resistance to eliminate Reinhold Heydrich, the loathsome head of the German occupation, leading into the only successful assassination of a major Nazi leader during the war. And I described how the remarkable people imprisoned at Terezín sustained their love for culture, and learning despite the German effort to crush their will. Among the young artists of Terezín was my cousin Milena, about 11 years old at the time. Some 20 of her drawings are now in the possession of the Jewish Museum in Prague. Like her companions, she drew pictures of the kind that children draw of people and houses and animals and the sun. I was startled when doing research to discover what I believe to be a photograph of Milena taken during the infamous Red Cross inspection of Terezín. The inspectors, as you may know, were totally and inexcusably taken in by Nazi lies. At a press conference, they assured the world that the prisoners were enjoying a happy and carefree existence and that there was no truth to the rumor that some of them were being sent to so-called labor camps in the East. But of the 10 children in the picture with Milena, only one, a young Dutch boy, survived. Although I came across numerous examples of cruelty and betrayal in my research, they are not what I will take with me as I look ahead. I will remember instead the abundant acts of resistance and courage performed by people facing horrors we can barely imagine. And I will also reflect on some of the historical lessons of that period. Leadership matters, wishful thinking is dangerous, and democracies must work together. Because in our era, no country can hope to be safe through its actions alone. After Prague Winter was released, I continued in spare moments to sort through notebooks and writings and letters that belonged to my father. One day in 2014, I came across what can only be described as a message in a bottle. It was a wartime journal belonging to my maternal grandmother, Ruzhena Shpiglova. I will never know how it got into my parents' hands, but I do know that my grandmother wanted, in her own words, and I quote, to systematically remember what has already happened to the Jews, unquote. I was honored to be able to fulfill that goal by publishing her journal earlier this year in my newest book. And I was also grateful several years ago to be able to visit Terezín with my children and grandchildren to dedicate a plaque to all the members of our family, including Ruzhena, who were killed in the Holocaust. We traveled thousands of miles to honor people whose fates had been lost to history and whose connections to us we rediscovered and restored. Like so many other victims of the Holocaust, they left us with barely a trace. But as Elie Wiesel has reminded us, we are their trace. And as the Terezín Music Foundation reminds us, we can and must keep their legacy alive. So thank you so much for this honor and for everything you do to help us remember and to heal.